"Don't tell anyone you're my wife tonight," my husband whispered, with one hand on my elbow and the other already reaching for the smile he wore in public. "Just say you're a family friend." For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. The ballroom was loud enough to hide cruelty. Crystal glasses chimed, a jazz trio played near the marble staircase, and hundreds of polished people in dark suits and evening gowns moved beneath chandeliers that made the whole room glow like it belonged to someone else's life. I was 67 years old, standing inside the grand ballroom of the Whitmore Hotel in downtown Chicago, wearing the champagne dress I had chosen with care and the silver lily brooch Richard had given me on our 40th anniversary. I had spent nearly an hour pinning my silver hair into a soft twist because I wanted to look dignified beside him. Not young, not flashy, just dignified. After 42 years of marriage, I believed I had earned the right to stand next to my husband at a company gala without being treated like a mistake he had brought in through the service entrance. But Richard did not look at me like his wife that night. He looked at me the way a man looks at an old stain on a white shirt, worried someone important might notice. "A family friend?" I repeated quietly. My voice did not shake, and that seemed to bother him more than tears would have. He glanced over his shoulder toward the registration table, where executives were laughing with their spouses, where women half my age leaned into photographs, where my son Daniel and his wife Vanessa were already being greeted as if they were royalty. Vanessa looked across the room and gave me a small smile, the kind that had no warmth in it. Richard lowered his voice. "Margaret, please don't make this difficult. Tonight is important." Important. That word settled between us like a locked door. I looked down at the name badge the young woman at check-in had handed me after she failed to find my name on the guest list. It did not say Mrs. Margaret Caldwell. It did not say Richard Caldwell's wife. It said only one word in plain black letters. Guest. I touched the edge of it with my thumb, careful not to bend it. There are humiliations that arrive like thunder, loud enough for everyone to hear. Others arrive softly, printed on cheap white paper and clipped to the front of your dress. Richard stepped away from me as a group of board members approached, his shoulders straightening, his face brightening, his hand leaving my elbow as if my skin had become evidence. I stayed near the edge of the room, close to a tall marble column, holding my small purse with both hands. I did not call after him. I did not ask why he had brought me at all. I simply watched him become the man he wanted strangers to believe he had always been. Then, just as I was turning toward the hallway to find a quiet place to breathe, the crowd in front of me shifted. Thomas Whitmore, the CEO himself, walked away from the front tables and came straight toward me. He did not look at Richard. He did not look at Vanessa. He stopped in front of me, smiled with unmistakable recognition, and said, "There you are, Mrs. Caldwell. The board has been looking for you." Behind him, Richard turned around so fast his champagne nearly spilled. 6 hours earlier, I had stood in front of the bedroom mirror trying to decide whether the dress made me look elegant or foolish. It was a soft champagne color, modest at the neckline, with sleeves that covered my upper arms and a skirt that fell just below my knees. I had bought it on sale at a department store in Oak Brook, telling myself that there were still occasions in a woman's life when she should allow herself to feel seen. Richard had mentioned the gala 2 weeks earlier, almost casually, while reading emails at the breakfast table. "You can come this year," he had said, as if offering me a seat in a waiting room. I remembered looking up from my coffee, surprised by the invitation, because for years there had always been a reason I should stay home. The crowd would be too loud. The dinner would run too late. The people would be too business-focused. He would say those things gently, and I would accept them because marriage teaches you to excuse small exclusions until they become the shape of your life. That afternoon, I polished the silver lily brooch he had given me on our 40th anniversary and pinned it near my heart. I told myself not to expect too much. Just dinner beside my husband. Just one photograph where I was not cropped out by absence. When Richard came into the room, already dressed in his tuxedo, he stopped near the doorway and looked at me for several seconds without smiling. "That color is a little noticeable, do you think?" he asked. I looked down at myself. I thought it was appropriate. He adjusted his cuff links, avoiding my eyes. Maybe something darker would be better. Navy. Black. Something simple. Simple. At 67, I knew what that word meant when a husband used it while looking at his wife. It meant smaller, quieter, easier to ignore. Before I could answer, his phone rang, and Vanessa's face appeared on the screen. He put her on speaker without asking me. "Are you two almost ready?" she sang, bright and polished as always. I could hear Daniel in the background asking where his watch was. Richard told her we would leave in 15 minutes. Then Vanessa said, "Margaret, tonight is very formal. Just follow Dad's lead, all right? There will be cameras, donors, board members. It is not really a family-style event." I stood very still, one hand resting on the dresser. Not really a family-style event. Yet Daniel was going. Vanessa was going. Their names had been confirmed weeks ago. Mine, apparently, was a complication to be managed. Richard ended the call and gave me the tired look he used whenever he wanted me to make things easier for him. "She means well," he said. I turned back to the mirror and smoothed the front of my dress. "Does she?" He sighed, already impatient. "Margaret, please. Tonight is not the time." I almost removed the brooch. I almost changed into the black dress hanging in the back of my closet, the one I wore to funerals and quiet dinners where nobody expected me to shine. Instead, I fastened the clasp more securely and picked up my purse. If they wanted me invisible, they should not have invited a woman who had spent 42 years learning how to survive silence. The ride downtown took 40 minutes, though it felt longer because Richard filled the car with silence. Chicago moved past the windows in gray and gold, office towers catching the last light, Lake Michigan barely visible between buildings like a strip of cold metal. I sat with my purse on my lap and watched his hands on the steering wheel. He had always driven like a man trying to prove he was in control, both hands steady, eyes forward, never asking for directions even when he was lost. When we pulled up to the Whitmore Hotel, a valet opened my door before Richard could decide whether to do it himself. I thanked the young man, stepped carefully onto the curb, and looked up at the entrance. The hotel was glowing. Tall glass doors, brass handles, white flowers arranged in enormous urns, a red carpet running from the sidewalk to the lobby, as if every guest mattered. For one foolish second, I let myself believe I might matter too. Inside, the air smelled of roses, polished wood, and expensive perfume. Richard moved quickly toward the registration table, and I followed 2 steps behind him, close enough to look like his wife, far enough to understand that he preferred distance. The young woman at check-in smiled at him immediately. "Good evening, Mr. Caldwell. We have you at table 1. She handed him a thick name badge with his full title printed beneath his name. Richard Caldwell, Senior Strategic Advisor. Then she looked at me and searched the list. Her smile tightened. She searched again. "I am sorry, ma'am. Could you repeat your name?" "Margaret Caldwell," I said. "Caldwell." She glanced at Richard. He cleared his throat. "She is with me. Not my wife. Not Margaret. Just with me." The young woman became flustered, tapping at her tablet, calling over another staff member, whispering over the alphabetized list. I stood there under the bright lobby lights while people flowed around me, laughing, greeting one another, accepting badges that proved they belonged. Finally, she printed a temporary tag and clipped it into a plastic holder. "Here you are," she said softly, embarrassed for a mistake she had not made. I looked down. One word. Guest. Richard was already looking away. "Come on," he said. We entered the ballroom, and I saw the seating chart near the doors. Table 1 held Richard, Daniel, Vanessa, Thomas Whitmore, 2 board members, and their spouses. My name was nowhere near his. After several minutes, a coordinator found me on a separate list and pointed toward the back corner of the room. Table 19, near the kitchen doors, near the black curtain where the sound crew kept their equipment. "It must be a capacity issue," Richard said, not looking at me. Then Vanessa appeared beside him in a silver dress, her smile smooth and practiced. "Margaret, that table will be much quieter for you. You will be more comfortable there." Daniel stood behind her, handsome in his dark suit, studying the floor as if the pattern in the carpet required all his attention. I looked from my husband to my son to my daughter-in-law and understood something with painful clarity. This had not been an accident. This was arrangement. This was placement. This was the careful art of making a woman disappear without ever asking her to leave. I nodded once, walked to table 19, and sat down with my name badge turned slightly inward, where only I could read the word they had chosen for me. From table 19, the ballroom looked different than it must have looked from the front. At table 1, the candles seemed warmer, the flowers taller, the servers quicker to refill water glasses before anyone noticed they were empty. At my table, one of the napkins had been folded unevenly, and every time the kitchen doors swung open, a breath of hot air rolled across my shoulders, carrying the smell of roasted chicken and dish soap. I sat between a florist named Paula and a young photographer who kept checking his camera batteries under the table. They were kind people, both of them, and that somehow made the insult sharper. I had not been placed with strangers because there was no room. I had been placed where Richard believed nobody important would look. When the lights dimmed, a large screen lowered behind the stage, and the room softened into silence. Thomas Whitmore stepped to the podium and began speaking about legacy, resilience, and the men who helped build the company through difficult years. Then Richard's face appeared on the screen. Younger in some photographs, confident in others, always standing in the center. The video showed him shaking hands, cutting ribbons, laughing with executives, walking through construction sites in a hard hat. His voice came through the speakers, calm and proud. "I built my career on risk," he said. "There were years when I had nothing but belief and the willingness to work harder than everyone else." Around me, people nodded. Someone at the next table whispered that Richard was inspiring. I folded my hands in my lap and looked at the silver lily on my dress. Belief, work, risk. He made those words sound clean, as if they had belonged to him alone. But I remembered the year he came home at 2 in the afternoon and sat in the dark kitchen without taking off his coat because the bank had refused him again. I remembered the final notice from the electric company tucked under the fruit bowl so Daniel would not see it after school. I remembered taking bookkeeping work from 3 small businesses in our neighborhood, balancing receipts at midnight with tired eyes while Richard slept on the sofa because disappointment had made him heavy. I remembered the bank officer sliding papers toward us across a polished desk and speaking mostly to Richard, even though my name was the one on the savings account. Our house in Naperville had been small, but it was ours, and I signed against it with a hand that trembled only after we got back to the car. Richard had cried then, quietly, with his forehead resting against the steering wheel. He had said, "I will never forget this, Margaret." On the screen, older Richard smiled into the camera. "No one gave me anything," he said. Applause rose around me like a wave. I did not clap, not because I hated him. That would have been simpler. I sat still because grief has many forms, and one of them is hearing your life erased in a room full of people who believe they are honoring the truth. When the applause faded, servers began moving between tables with plates of salad, and the ballroom returned to its polished noise. I reached for my water glass, not because I was thirsty, but because my hands needed something ordinary to do. Across the room, Richard stood near the stage accepting handshakes, wearing the pleased expression of a man who had just heard his favorite version of himself spoken aloud. Daniel was beside him, laughing at something one of the board members said, and Vanessa stood close enough to Richard to look like the hostess of the evening. She had always been good at that, entering a room that was not hers and arranging herself until people assumed it was. A few minutes later, she crossed the ballroom toward me with the careful grace of someone performing kindness for an audience. Her silver dress caught the light with every step. She stopped beside my chair and placed one hand lightly on the back of it, not touching me, just claiming the space around me. "Margaret," she said softly, though not softly enough to avoid being overheard by Paula the florist. "Are you doing all right back here?" Back here. 2 harmless words. 2 little pins slid neatly beneath the skin. I looked up at her. "I am fine, Vanessa." Her smile held. "Good. Richard is about to give his remarks after dinner, and there will be cameras near the front. I just wanted to make sure you are comfortable where you are." The photographer beside me stopped adjusting his lens. He heard it too. Not concern. Instruction. I glanced toward Daniel, who had followed her halfway and now stood several feet away with his hands in his pockets. My son was 42 years old. But in that moment, I saw the little boy who used to hide behind my skirt when adults asked him questions. Only now, he was hiding behind his wife. "Daniel," I said. He looked at me then, quickly, unhappily. "Mom, please," he murmured. "Do not turn this into something awkward." There it was. Not, "Are you hurt?" Not, "Why are you sitting here?" Not, "Mom, you should be with us." Just a request that I make my own humiliation easier for everyone else to carry. Vanessa reached into the small evening bag at her wrist and pulled out a folded program. They printed these beautifully. she said, placing it beside my plate as if offering me a favor. I opened it because refusing would have given her too much satisfaction. The heavy cream paper listed the evening schedule, the award presentation, the donors, and then a section near the bottom titled Special Thanks to the Caldwell Family. I read the names once. Richard Caldwell, Daniel Caldwell, Vanessa Caldwell. I read them again, slower, as if my own name might appear if I behaved patiently enough. It did not. 42 years of marriage, one mortgaged house, emptied savings, late nights over ledgers, birthdays postponed, vacations never taken, and they had reduced my place in the family to a blank line nobody intended to fill. Vanessa watched my face, waiting for a crack. I gave her none. I folded the program carefully along its original crease and set it back on the table. It is beautifully printed, I said. For the first time that evening, her smile flickered. She had expected pain to make me small. She did not understand that some pain makes a woman perfectly still, and stillness can be more dangerous than anger. The program had moved into the award portion of the evening when the room began to settle again. Dessert plates were being cleared, coffee was poured into white china cups, and the lights near the stage brightened until every face at the front tables looked polished and important. Richard stood beside the podium, one hand resting against his jacket button, waiting for his introduction. I knew that posture. I had seen it at parent-teacher conferences when Daniel was young, at church fundraisers, at neighborhood meetings, anywhere Richard wanted to appear humble while making sure everyone noticed him. Vanessa had returned to table 1 and sat with her shoulders straight, smiling as if she had arranged the entire evening herself. Daniel leaned toward her, whispering something that made her laugh softly behind her hand. I watched them from table 19 with the folded program beside my plate and my untouched coffee cooling in front of me. For the first time all night, I felt strangely calm. Not peaceful. Calm. There is a difference. Peace comes when nothing is wrong. Calm comes when everything is wrong, but you finally stop begging it to be different. Thomas Whitmore stepped up to the microphone. He was a tall man with silver hair and the kind of voice that made people put down their forks. Before we present tonight's Legacy Leadership Award, he said, there is someone in this room I would like to recognize first. Richard smiled automatically, already shifting his weight as if preparing to walk forward. But Thomas did not turn toward him. He looked down at the papers in his hand, then scanned the ballroom. His eyes passed table 1, moved beyond the donors, beyond the executives, past the floral arrangements and the cameras, until they reached the back corner of the room. Until they reached me. The room seemed to narrow. Mrs. Margaret Caldwell, he said clearly. My full name traveled through the ballroom with more dignity than my own family had given it all evening. Heads turned. Paula the florist looked at me, startled. The young photographer lowered his camera. At the front, Richard's smile froze. Thomas left the podium. Not a staff member. Not an assistant. The chief executive officer himself stepped down from the stage and began walking across the ballroom toward table 19. Every conversation dissolved behind him. I could hear the soft click of his dress shoes on the floor. I could hear Vanessa's chair shift sharply. When Thomas reached my table, he stopped beside me and inclined his head with genuine respect. Mrs. Caldwell, forgive us, he said, his voice warm but firm. Your seat should have been at the front. I looked at him, then toward Richard, whose face had lost its color under the golden lights. For years, I had been told that important rooms were not meant for me. Yet here was the most powerful man in the room offering me his hand. I took it and stood. My knees felt weak, but my back was straight. Thomas turned toward the audience and said, ladies and gentlemen, there would be no company gala tonight without this woman. For several seconds, no one moved. The ballroom held its breath while Thomas Whitmore stood beside me with his hand still lightly supporting mine, not because I needed help, but because he understood ceremony better than anyone in that room. Recognition, when done properly, is not rushed. It is allowed to settle. He led me toward the stage slowly, past tables where people who had ignored me all evening now watched with open curiosity. I did not look at Vanessa, though I could feel her stare. I did not look at Daniel, though I sensed his confusion like heat from across the room. I looked only ahead, at the stairs to the stage, at the microphone, at the bright circle of light where Richard had expected to stand alone. Thomas waited until I was seated in the chair beside the podium, a chair someone had quickly brought from the front row. Then he returned to the microphone and unfolded a cream-colored envelope. 31 years ago, he began, this company was not a success story. It was a struggling regional operation with unpaid invoices, nervous lenders, and one last chance to stay alive. Richard stared at the floor. His hands were clasped in front of him so tightly that his knuckles had gone pale. Many of you know Richard Caldwell's role in that period, Thomas continued. But very few of you know the name that appears on the documents that allowed the company to survive that year. He held up the envelope. This letter was written by our late founder, Charles Whitmore, my father, shortly before his retirement. He asked that it be kept in the company archive until the night we honored the people who truly carried this organization through its hardest season. The room was silent enough that I heard the paper slide from the envelope. Thomas read only a portion, but every word seemed to reach inside my chest and touch a place I had stopped protecting years ago. Richard brought us the plan, he read. Margaret Caldwell brought us the faith. She signed the guarantee when no bank trusted us. She placed her family home at risk when others stepped back. She asked for no applause and no title. But I have never forgotten that the company's first survival year rested on her courage. My eyes lowered to my hands. They looked older under the stage lights, the veins more visible, the wedding ring loose after years of wear. Those hands had packed Daniel's lunches, typed invoices after midnight, signed papers I barely understood because Richard's dream had been falling apart and I loved him enough to catch it. Thomas looked out over the room. Again, there is also a matter of record that should have been acknowledged long ago. As part of that guarantee, Mrs. Caldwell was issued founding advisory shares. They remain valid in our archive and in our corporate records. A ripple moved through the ballroom. Not loud, just enough. The sound of a story changing shape. Vanessa's lips parted. Daniel turned toward his father. Richard did not look at any of us. Thomas closed the letter and said, "Tonight, we are correcting an omission that should never have happened." Then he turned to me and began clapping. One pair of hands first, then another. Then the entire ballroom rose around me. Not for the wife Richard had tried to hide, but for the woman he had spent years hoping no one would remember. The standing applause did not make me feel triumphant. It made me feel exposed, as if someone had opened a curtain I had spent decades pretending did not exist. I smiled because Thomas Whitmore turned toward me with respect, because people were standing, because cameras were pointed at the stage, and because a woman my age learns how to carry complicated feelings without letting them spill onto the floor. But inside, I was not thinking about shares or letters or a room full of strangers finally seeing me. I was thinking about our old kitchen in Naperville, the yellow curtains I had sewn myself, the pencil marks on the door frame where we measured Daniel every birthday, and the night Richard promised me he would never forget what I had done for him. After the ceremony ended, people came to shake my hand. A woman from the board told me she was honored to meet me. A younger executive said his grandmother had gone back to school at 68 and that my story reminded him of her. Thomas gave me a business card and quietly said his legal team would be in touch about the advisory shares. I thanked him, folded the card into my purse, and walked toward the hallway outside the ballroom where the noise softened behind thick carpet and closed doors. I had only taken a few steps when Richard caught up to me. "Margaret," he said, breathless, as if he had been chasing something he had already lost years ago. I stopped beneath a wall sconce and turned to face him. Without the stage lights, he looked smaller, older, not weak, exactly, but unfinished, like a portrait someone had stopped painting halfway through. "You have to understand," he said. I did not know Thomas was going to do that. "I believe you," I said. Relief flashed across his face too quickly. "Then you know this got out of hand." I was trying to keep things simple. These events can be overwhelming. I did not want people bothering you with old business matters. I looked at him for a long moment. The hallway smelled faintly of coffee and lilies from the arrangements near the ballroom doors. "No, Richard, you did not want them bothering me with gratitude." His mouth tightened. "That is not fair. Neither was placing me at table 19. He looked away. That was answer enough. Vanessa appeared then, with Daniel behind her. Her silver dress no longer looked elegant to me. It looked cold. "Margaret," she said carefully, "tonight became very public, and I think we all need to be thoughtful about how this affects the family image." I almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because some people reveal themselves with such precision that there is nothing left to accuse them of. "The family image," I repeated. Daniel finally spoke. Mom, we should talk tomorrow. Everyone is emotional. I looked at my son, the boy I had raised, the man who had watched me sit in the back of a room and called my pain awkward. No, Daniel. Tonight was the clearest I have felt in years. Richard reached for my hand, but I moved it gently to the strap of my purse. No drama. No scene. Just the smallest correction. Margaret, please, he said. Come home with me, and we can discuss this privately. I studied the man I had loved for most of my adult life. I could still see pieces of him under the pride, under the fear, under all the years of letting silence benefit him. That was the cruelest part. He was not a stranger. He was worse. He was familiar. I gave you privacy for 42 years, I said. You used it to erase me. Vanessa opened her mouth, but I raised one hand, not sharply, only enough. She closed it. Then I stepped around them and walked toward the lobby, where the revolving doors turned slowly in the Chicago night, and my reflection moved toward me instead of away. The next morning, I woke before sunrise in the guest room, not because Richard had asked me to sleep there, but because I had chosen it. Choice is a small word until you realize how long you have lived without using it. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that usually comes after an argument, except there had been no argument. Richard had come home after me, walked into the bedroom, and found my side of the bed untouched. He knocked once on the guest room door, waited, then went away when I did not answer. I lay there beneath the spare quilt, staring at the pale ceiling, feeling neither victory nor sorrow in any clean form. It was all mixed together. 42 years do not end in one night. They loosen thread by thread, until one morning you look down and understand the fabric was already coming apart. At 7 o'clock, I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and placed Thomas Whitmore's business card beside my wedding ring. I had removed the ring while washing my hands, and for the first time in decades, I did not put it back on immediately. Richard entered the kitchen in yesterday's dress shirt, his face tired and guarded. Margaret, he said carefully, we need to talk before this becomes a legal mess. I looked at him over the rim of my coffee cup. It became a legal matter the moment you let me believe I owned nothing in a life I helped build. He sat down slowly. You are taking this too far. I almost laughed, but the sound would have given him too much. Instead, I reached for my phone and called the attorney whose number Thomas had given me. I scheduled a meeting for 10:30 that morning. I asked for a review of the advisory shares, our marital assets, the old guarantee documents, and every paper Richard had once told me was too complicated for me to worry about. Richard listened, his expression changing with every sentence. When I ended the call, he whispered, after everything we have been through? I stood and carried my cup to the sink. That is exactly why. 3 weeks later, I walked back into the Whitmore offices wearing a navy dress, comfortable shoes, and the silver lily brooch. Not as Richard Caldwell's wife. Not as a guest. My name was printed correctly this time, with a title beneath it, Margaret Caldwell, founding advisory shareholder. Thomas introduced me to a small committee creating a scholarship fund for women over 60 who wanted to return to school, start businesses, or rebuild after years of putting everyone else first. I accepted a seat on the advisory board. Across the conference room, Richard stood near the back wall, invited but not centered. Vanessa did not come. Daniel sent a brief message saying he hoped we could talk soon. I read it once and put the phone away. Some doors do not need to be slammed. They simply need to stop being held open for people who only walk through them when they need something. As the meeting began, sunlight moved across the long glass table and settled near my hands. They still looked old. They still carried every year. But they were steady. That night, Richard had tried to make me invisible. Instead, he reminded everyone exactly who I was.